Cape Media News Conversations. I'm Sarah Colvin. The second Barnstable State Rep race is being contested this year. Incumbent Will Crocker is facing a challenge from Paul Cusack, the Democratic candidate, and I'm very pleased to welcome Paul in studio today. Paul, thank you so much for coming in and joining me today.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here. We talked a little bit earlier. This is my first interview, so I'm pretty excited.
Excellent. I'm so privileged to have you as first television interview here on Cape Cod. Very exciting. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
You're a shell fisherman, you're a combat veteran, you've got experience in D.C.
Yeah, I spend every day out on the water with the Cape Oyster Company. I'm a shell fisherman. It's been an amazing experience. I really wanted to do something that was both entrepreneurial and in the private sector, but also has like a really great impact on the immediate environment. You know, the remediation of primarily things like the impact of phosphorus and nitrogen on our water quality around here is a really big issue, and I thought that had a great balance, that particular job. So I'm a shell fisherman. I go out and get oysters with a great team of guys every day, all week, and it's been an extraordinary experience. And yeah.
And I gotta say, my favorite thing about oysters is eating them, but my second favorite thing about oysters really is that impact they have on the environment. We hear so much about the nitrogen loading issues that are causing problems in our bays and waterways. And so to hear you talk about oyster farming as a kind of way to help that issue is really great. It's a big part of it.
It's a big part of it, and it can be a really big growth industry for us around here. We've seen commercial fishing overall being headed in a specific direction around here. The fleets have shrunk over time. There's a real big opportunity in aquaculture in particular and shell fishing as a whole to expand in jobs. And they're great, clean, blue economy jobs. I'm excited to have one, and I'd like to see us expand that even further.
And you get to be out on the water most of the day in the summer, which you can't really be.
It really is great. My office every day is gorgeous, right? It's really Katuitt Bay, and we're just jumping in and out of skiffs all day, moving around heavy equipment, working with animals. We're farming the sea. You know, an oyster is an animal. People sort of, it's a rock animal, but
it is.
Yeah, so you're right. It's, I'm very fortunate.
Great, but you didn't bring me any oysters today.
I did
Paul.
not. That was very thoughtless.
All right, next time.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your career in politics.
Oh,
You had some experience in Washington. Talk to me a little bit about how you got involved in public service.
Sure. When I graduated from college, a buddy was just made a suggestion to me, and before you know it, I was volunteering for the re-elect effort for the Clinton-Gore administration back in 1996. I was really drawn to the conversation in 1996, which was about building a bridge to the future, the 21st century, preparing America for the challenges and opportunities of the century that we're now 18 years into. And so I volunteered. I traveled the entire country doing advance for the vice president. And eventually, in my real first full-time job out of college, ended up as the vice president's personal aide in the West Wing of the White House. Just down the hall from the Oval Office, and it's effectively a gatekeeper position. But I got to work side by side with the Vice President there for 4 years as he tried to take his individual personal vision for what America could be in the 21st century. Didn't necessarily work out, as we know.
Not exactly.
Yeah, but yeah, it was an amazing experience. I got to see, you know, there was obviously more than just Bush v. Gore and hanging chads in 2000. There was also other aspects of the 1997 to 2001 period where I got to see government work at its best, but also at some of the worst aspects of how government can function.
And I'm sure so many takeaways about the inner workings of the White House, the inner workings of government, but also kind of seeing how initiatives pass, how really to make things work. And when you're in Washington, you really are in the middle of it. And you've got issues all across the nation, as opposed to just here in the 2nd Barnstable District, which seems kind of tiny in comparison when you're looking at issues nationwide.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm really excited about the issues that hopefully I get a chance to work on for the folks of the 2nd Barnstable and for the portion of Yarmouth that is included in the 2nd Barnstable. We have a lot of unmet needs. You know?
We really do.
We really do. And so we've talked a little bit about the environment. The environment and the economy for us are totally stitched together. You can't separate those two things out. And we also have issues with, obviously, with opioids and mental health. right?
Absolutely.
We have got to really address the stigma that still remains with us after decades of forward-leaning folks trying to address mental health and put it on parity with like general physical health. We're just not there yet, but it plays out in everybody's life who I'm coming across when I'm out door knocking, canvassing, shaking hands, going to events. Every family has some sort of relationship with a mental health issue, whether that be opioid abuse, which is really on the tip of everybody's tongue, addiction as a whole, suicide, depression, ADHD, Alzheimer's. It's every single family is dealing with aspects of our mental health, and I am not seeing that need met within the conversation that we're presently having.
And really, when we look at it, the mental health issues is the root of so many of the issues we talk about. You mentioned addiction, especially to opioids, alcoholism, depression. So all of those things really do tie back to mental health, and it's not a one-size-fits-all problem. It's a spectrum of issues, and you can have folks who are suffering intensely from mental health issues, or some that just struggle getting through the day. But to be able to take a look at that, I mean, it's certainly not an easy problem to solve. But I agree that it's something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, right. We've gotten to a point with a bunch of the challenges that face us where there is no single solution. It's got to be an all of the above approach. So we talked a little bit about the environment earlier, right? We need to deal with the eutrophication of our waters in ways that are about 5 to 6 or 10 different solutions. We can't just find one, fund that, and be like, woo, that one's over, let's move to the next one. A lot of problem solving is just adequately addressing things at the very least, but anytime you do a really good job of solving a problem, you're just getting a key to opening your way up into another new set of challenges. So the same thing with mental health. We have got to have, I really think, a holistic, energetic, focused, and compassionate government response to this. And we talk a lot about it, but I don't see necessarily the action that we would need to actually move the needle and provide circumstances in which our hardworking families around here are getting some relief.
Sure. So I want to talk more about the issues in a second, but the question that I really want to ask you, I love to ask this question to people who are not from here originally, is how did you get to Cape Cod? Why are you here?
Yeah. So one of the last things I did before coming here was I served as a ranger in the 2nd Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment. I did 4 trips to Afghanistan, 2 to the Hindu Kush, 2 to Kandahar City. I had an extraordinary experience in the service. I really did. I got to be a part of something much larger than myself, and I feel like we made material contributions to the national interest in the missions that we accomplished overseas. That being said, when I had an opportunity to pick where I was going to serve, right? If you're in the Army, you don't really get to choose much about it. You don't get to choose your clothing, for instance. So you don't get to choose where you're going to serve. When I had an opportunity to choose, I chose the Cape. I wanted to come back here. My parents are here. My parents are approaching 80. They're doing well. They're doing great. But I wanted to be with them. I left home when I was younger and haven't really been back since. This has been our home since the 90s when my parents moved here full time, and I've been based here since 2009, but then subsequently was mostly deployed, so I didn't spend as much time here as I liked. So when I got the opportunity to pick where I was going to serve, I chose here because I really can't imagine a better place or a better time or with better people to be. So I don't see myself as a wash ashore, but I know it's a phrase that gets used around here. But hopefully, I'm as much a true Cape Codder as the next person.
Well, we do have a really special community here, and I think that's one of my favorite things about talking to folks about why they've decided to make their life here and come back here, whether you began here or not. It's that community, the sense of community, and all of the wonderful opportunity that we have here on Cape Cod.
Yeah, we've been a magnet for people for a long time. I mean, we think about ourselves maybe in the sense of a tourism economy, but if you do think about the decades, if not more than a century, of providing extraordinary family experiences, particularly through the summer experience. This place manufactures amazing summer memories for people. But there's a lot more going on to the Cape. We're on a peninsula thrust out into the middle of the Atlantic. And we have this interrelationship with the ocean and nature and people and the land, which is really extraordinary and different, and a real call for me. And so that's why I'm back here.
And so what made you decide that you wanted to step up and run for state rep in the 2nd Barnstable District?
Yeah, I'm attracted to sort of intractable problems. I feel like I had a really great opportunity being in the service to work with folks who were not necessarily exactly like me, who had different opinions, different approaches, different frames through which to see our shared life and place here in America. And I love working in that context. And I can't imagine a better job than being a state rep. You get to be at the intersection of people, problems, ideas, movements, and that has a ton of appeal for me. I feel like that's going to get the most out of me. That type of work environment and those type of challenges are going to give me the opportunity to be of use to my neighbor, which is really something that is really deeply at the core of what why I hear the call to service.
So what do you think the biggest needs of the 2nd Barnstable District are?
Yeah, I want to be clear. I think there's a lot of opportunities that are taken by politicians or aspiring ones to talk in worst case scenario. Really, the house is burning, I'm the one to save it, I'm going to run in there and fix everything. I want to be clear that I think that the Cape fundamentally is a really strong and amazing place, and our people are too. They're charitable, they're smart, we're compassionate, curious. And so I don't want to start, there's such a push, I feel like, always to start with the negative space. But I think we should be more than hopeful. We should be excited about where we are at this point in time. That being said, that doesn't really help the folks who are really struggling, right? And there's folks being left behind. I spend a bunch of time every day down on my knees, sort of gathering up seed, oyster seed that spread itself out over the farm in different ways. I gather those seeds up and make sure that they make their way back in the ocean and eventually, hopefully, into the market and maybe onto your plate. We're not gathering folks up in that same way. We're letting a bunch of our neighbors fall through the cracks. I think that's unconscionable. I'd like to participate in efforts that sort of draw some of the folks who are in the shadows out of the shadows. If folks never have been invited to the table or even heard of the table, I would like to invite them to the table. If you feel voiceless, overlooked, marginalized by the political process, I would like to be an agent who ends up sort of reversing that trend around here. So I think that that's the larger frame, but individually, there's a nexus for me between the economy, the environment, and housing that we really need to address. We have an economy that is predicated really on a seasonal tourism type of experience. That's great. That's a decision that we made about 100 years ago as a community in this region, and I think it's been great for us. It's taken us 100 years. I think we have to adjust in the 21st century. I don't think it has to be a binary choice to move away from tourism, for instance, but I think if we could have a more well-rounded economy on the edges, beyond the shoulder seasons, and so that people aren't just in a rush constantly to get their yearly take in a 8 to 12 week period, I think that'd be much more healthy for us, and we would probably have a more recession-proof economy around here. We've always talked about jobs. The conversation here has really been focused much more about jobs. It's never really been about careers. And there's a bunch of really potentially great career opportunities here. We have these niche economies, primarily in the blue economy. I think the Cape Chamber's study on the blue economy is one of the best things I've read since I've been back here on the Cape. We have an economy that is the environment, an environment that is the economy, and we have a bunch of great areas in which we're strong and a bunch of institutions that have technologies and jobs that need to be found their way into the private sector and into free enterprise, and that making that translation and then creating more careers. I'm in my 40s. We're maybe of the same age group.
I think
so. There's a little bit of a population donut hole that we probably occupy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to live in a place that draws a bunch of families and young folks to not leave here when they graduate from high school and don't come back.
You know, and you just said something that really I can't believe that I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, and it's focus on careers instead of jobs, and that's so smart, because thinking about jobs, and you just feel like you go and you punch a clock, you get a paycheck. Career is something that grows over time, that will kind of give you the base that you need, the sustainability that you need to be able to perhaps purchase a house or find that better housing and really get into it. And it's just an interesting way of thinking about that.
Yeah, yeah. I think
that kind of mind shift is interesting, and so as you said, you know, linking the economy with our environment. You know, we've heard that multiple times. I think Congressman Delahunt said that to me years ago.
Right,
that the environment is our economy, and it's very true here. And so, one of the things that I've heard from our employers is, you know, it's that gap between the cost of housing and the salaries that our businesses can pay. So any thoughts on kind of closing that gap?
Sure. Yeah, that's great, because that's really about attainable housing, right? We've got market rate, which we know. We've got affordable, that we understand. But attainable housing is really the housing that our working families are in pursuit of. I took a walk last fall when I was trying to figure out how it is that I might be of service around here. And I took a bus out to Provincetown and then walked the length of the Cape back towards Sagamore. I walked across the bridge, ended at Friendly's, got myself a frap. And so it took about a week.
Wow, that's cool.
It was a really amazing experience. But the stories I kept hearing, because that was the intent, was to really interact with both the land as well as with my neighbors here on the Cape. And I found that quite frequently when I asked folks who were raising families, how many jobs do you guys, between the two of you, have? It was on average about 4.5 jobs between a couple.
Right, and that's a joke I made for a long time. It's the Cape Cod lifestyle. You have more than one job.
Right.
I think for the first time in my life, I do have one job, and that's like 2 months old. So it's a way of life.
Yeah.
On Cape Cod is that multiple job
But it puts
scenario.
stress, really. You're constantly making decisions in which some real key elements of the family experience are probably getting short shrift. So to make sure that that enough money's coming in. And so we've got some really long-standing trends around here, which is that we've got a second home ownership economy. And that puts upward pressure on housing costs, which means that our actual average housing is about 10% higher than the Commonwealth average. When you couple that with what we were discussing earlier about jobs and versus careers, having an economy that's really about jobs means that we have about a downward pressure of about 10% on wages. So 10% higher, 10% lower. In between there is really where the families are feeling the squeeze on housing costs. In particular, I have housing costs. I work a wage job. I know it intimately. And so I think it's really important to look again at a whole menu of different ways that we could probably address this. Zoning's got to be one of them. You know, greater density in places where there's already retail and population density. We have to look at our housing stock in a way that isn't about this monoculture of single family detached, which has been great. It has been good, but to a certain extent, it's exacerbating our problems with water quality for sure, right? We live on a sandy peninsula with one sole source aquifer, and we're all on septic systems.
And so that's one of the biggest challenges is how do we create density? How do we relax those zoning rules? How do we allow for more people who create more waste that creates more nitrogen? How do we save our water at the same time saving our community?
Yeah, well, we're definitely not going to sewer the entire Cape. I think we've looked at those numbers.
We're past that.
Yeah, we're past that. So there's a couple of different ways. So we definitely have to look at Title V. Title V needs to be updated for the 21st century with new technologies. We effectively have got 200,000 plus folks on septic systems, which really are just outhouses. We've taken the top of the outhouse, put it inside, and put the bottom of the outhouse in your front yard. That is no longer, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's true,
but talking
though.
about these things is part of what draws me to politics. Not all of it is all that pretty.
Exactly.
But, you know, a bunch of the problems are the ones that the market couldn't solve and the community couldn't solve. And so then you look for your local representative to help solve it. But yeah, so I think the 2/3 rule on changes in zoning at the town level needs to be considered or reconsidered. And we have to look at ways. Main Street, Hyannis, is an extraordinary opportunity. I don't like to talk negatively about it because it really shouldn't be seen in that frame. It should just be seen in the frame of just the potential upside. I think that mixed use retail, commercial, and residential along Main Street in Hyannis could dramatically change that space for the better. When you think about the harbor being here, Main Street being there, Cape Cod Baseball League being here, we have this great triangle of just local assets that somehow are balkanized from each other. We could, in very short order, I feel like, make some great small but important changes to downtown Hyannis that could be a leader. I spent a bunch of time at Mashpee Commons. Mashpee Commons obviously is slightly outside my district, but the retail experience along the 28 corridor is gravitating that way. I think it would be great if Hyannis took some steps. The bid has been great. I've had a bunch of conversations with a number of business owners along Main Street in Hyannis, and I think there's some work that we could definitely do there.
Great. And I think what Main Street Hyannis has that Mashpee Commons doesn't is the transportation center and the airport in close proximity. So you've got those transportation opportunities for people to be able to. Now Cape Air is debuting a flight to New York. They're going to do all winter long, daily. You've got buses coming in. You've got the train in the summertime. So you've got those transportation opportunities that make it feasible for people to live in downtown Hyannis.
Yeah, and that's really great, Sarah, to highlight. Hyannis, portion of Barnstable, is a gateway to the Cape. We have the ferries, we got the train, the bus, the airport, 6. All that combined, it only comes together in one spot, and that's Hyannis. That means that Hyannis is here to stay, obviously, and we got to take steps to make it a better and better experience, both for those folks who are here as our neighbors, as well as all the visitors that come here. I talked to Senator Wolf in depth about this and the challenges in particular about a gateway city, which effectively for this region, that's what we have here.
Absolutely. So elections coming up in November. What challenges are you facing as you head toward the polls in November?
Just probably available hours to get out and meet folks. You know, I feel like we've gotten a good response. We're having a lot of fun. A big draw for me is just the general joy I feel in doing this line of work. So I don't really think about it in those type of terms. When I think about challenges like that, I think if I think about my problems about the campaign, I'm always really thinking about the real problems that my neighbors face, which totally outstrip any problems that I would have or the campaign would have. And keeping that at the center of the campaign has meant that we don't really look at it as sort of like, do we have some problems heading towards November 6th? I think the reception's been great. Folks seem very engaged.
That's wonderful. Taking a very optimistic approach. So, Paul, anything that you would like to say to the voters out there in TV land?
Oh, yeah, sure. Ready? That'd be great. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah.
Go for it.
I think everyone knows how big this election is. I don't run around saying, hey, this is the biggest election of your lifetime, because every election is very big and important. I think highlighting some upcoming dates is important. Registration for the election, I think, ends on October 16th. Early voting, without an excuse, starts on October 22nd. Folks, go out and start voting on October 22nd. And generally, I just want folks to know that I have a great sense of purpose. I want to be of use to my neighbor, and that this fall I would really like to earn your vote. Thank you.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with me. It was great to talk with you, and I'm sure we will see you again before the election.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Paul Cusack, my guest today, running for state representative in the 2nd Barnstable District. For Cape Media News Conversations, I'm Sarah Colvin.